So hopefully everybody can see the slides okay. So firstly, my name is Gillian Askew. I am one of the co-founders of Go for Growth, and I'm also a procurement professional by trade. I've spent nearly 30 years in the public sector, in the procurement profession, with the first 18 years in my career spent in private sector, procuring on behalf of small to medium enterprises, but also FTSE 250 and FTSE 100. The latter part of my procurement career has all been spent in the public sector. I'm also a long-standing small business owner and social enterprise owner, and so I think that gives me the benefit of seeing the challenge from both lenses. Having procured for the public sector and answering those procurements as a small business owner, I can clearly see both sides of the challenge and the work that's involved. And Go for Growth has been set up to help to alleviate some of those challenges, specifically for SMEs and VCSEs in the public sector. Ian, over to you.
Hi, hello everyone. I'm Ian Westlake. I'm the head of procurement at Bradford Council. Bradford Council is a mid-sized local authority within West Yorkshire, and we spend in terms of third-party spend about £475 million per annum. In terms of my remit, I've obviously the traditional procurement function, small contract management function, and the full procure-to-pay service as well.
Thank you, Ian. So the first thing we're going to talk about in the session today is all about why are we thinking about the public sector as a market in relationship to small to medium enterprises and voluntary sector organisations right now. Well, the government have set a mandate to place 33% of all central government business with small to medium enterprises by 2022. And whilst arguably that mandate is for central government departments as it stands at the moment, actually it's a really good measure for all. And certainly one of the things that Go for Growth sees as an organisation is that the public sector, the wider public sector market, has got big ambitions that actually far exceed that 33%. And that is a real positive actually for small to medium enterprises and voluntary sector organisations. If we think about where the government currently is in that target of placing 33% to SMEs, directly awarded business to small to medium enterprises right now is 11%. So it's clear that there's a lot of work still to do. In total, with indirectly awarded, that is in the low 20s. So there has been progress that's been made, but there's still clearly a lot to go at. And I guess it's especially important when we think about that in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. The impact of COVID on smaller organisations has been immense. The Federation of Small Businesses have issued some statistics that suggest in the region of around 250,000 businesses are likely to cease to trade as a direct result of the pandemic. That's 5% of the small business market. And a further 23% of organisations, in order to survive post the pandemic, have had to reduce their staff numbers in order just to keep going. So the public sector, actually, in terms of its market attractiveness, it is a stable market. It's worth around 300 billion a year. Public services will continue to be procured. It's not going anywhere. It does pay pretty well. You know, it's not going to have funding issues or credit issues going forward. So there is a real market stability, which, when we've come through something as devastating as COVID-19, and when you also think about changing economic impacts of things like climate change, climate emergency, that stability can be really important. And if we overlay that 33% target to the whole of the public sector market, and if that was achieved across that broader public sector, that would in effect mean that for small to medium enterprises, there's a market size of 92 billion, which is a really good market size, specifically for small to medium enterprises and VCSEs of voluntary community or social enterprise sectors. The Go for Growth specifically is working with the public sector to help the public sector be as accessible as possible to all organisations regardless of size, and to help recover, build resilience and really help to develop local economic areas. And if we think about public good, so if you are looking at the public sector, including central government, you'll see things like social value or corporate social responsibility. If we think about the big ticket social items such as homelessness, worklessness or poverty, then arguably those things aren't going to improve or be eradicated without a stable and growing economy. And we're going to need innovation in how we go to market and how markets respond to the public sector if we're going to achieve those things. And small businesses and VCSE organisations are an absolute linchpin, a key to that 21st century public service delivery. And why are we talking about finding opportunities today? Well, Go for Growth, as you'll hear about more in a second, is working with lots of smaller organisations and VCSE organisations in lots of different ways. And we are engaging with thousands of organisations. And we ask often questions around what are the barriers, what are the issues, what are the challenges. And in a recent poll that we did, 67% of all the businesses that we talked to in that poll said that they would really need some more help, or at least some more information on how to find opportunities in the first place to be able to secure public sector work. And so that's why today has come about. And so Go for Growth as a programme really has two main audiences. We work at source with small to medium enterprises and voluntary sector organisations. And the thing that we do with those organisations is try to understand the challenges and the barriers that organisations are facing when they are either starting out in the public sector for the first time or are aspiring to grow in the public sector. We also work with and for the public sector, and we take that feedback and intelligence that businesses tell us firsthand. We analyse it and we anonymise it, and we return that intelligence back to the public sector. The reason we do that is public sector organisations that work with Go for Growth are committed to building diverse supply chain communities and inspiring competition. And the intelligence that we get through the Go for Growth programme really helps public sector organisations understand how they need to work in the future in order to be more accessible. But we also help businesses at source. So there is the Go for Growth portal, events like this and other channels where actually if you identify that there is a challenge or a barrier that you're working on for your business, then the support and the guidance and the help and the resources are there at source so that we can help you overcome those challenges and go on hopefully to secure more work and grow in the public sector. And so we'll talk a little bit about the main content for today's session, which is all about finding and understanding opportunities. There are a number of ways to find opportunities in the public sector. You probably will be familiar with, or you might be familiar with the term a procurement portal. All of the procurement opportunities, or most of the procurement opportunities now, are run through a portal. So anything over £25,000 in value should be advertised through any public sector organisation on Contracts Finder. Contracts Finder is free for businesses to use, and the Finder Tender Service is also a government search function portal, and that's also free for businesses to use. The difference between the two is Contracts Finder is for anything over 25,000 and the Finder Tender Service is for usually anything over 180,000. What you can see on the screen are other portals, the main portals that are there also. So you will see, for example, that there is Pro Contract Due North, which is typically used by local authorities and NHS. And there is a Yorkshire version of that called Your Tender. Now that is just changing at the moment. I'm just going to invite my colleague Ian just to tell us a little bit about that portal change, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jill. So the portal that all 22 local authorities use within the Yorkshire and Humber region is currently the Pro Contract Due North version of Your Tender. We're just about to start a 3-month transition to a new solution, and it will still be called Your Tender, which essentially stands for Yorkshire Tender, but that will be hosted by the Mersel or EU Supply Portal. So over the next 3 months, new opportunities at some point within that period will be published on the new system, and we are encouraging all suppliers that want to do business with the 22 local authorities, plus South Yorkshire Fire and Rescue and the West Yorkshire Combined Authority, to register on the new Mersel version of Your Tender. And I think we'll send a link out with the slides after this event so that all suppliers can register there. It's absolutely free to register, and it gives you the chance to look at opportunities that all 22 local authorities are publishing.
Thank you, Ian. And regardless actually of those portals, there is all the opportunities are also on Contracts Finder. So actually you can search for opportunities on Contracts Finder, and that will take you and tell you who the contracting authority is that is letting that tender, and your actual bid, if you were going to bid, would go through the portal, but you can use Contracts Finder in isolation should you wish, because all opportunities over 25,000 should be on there that are open. And I'm just going to give a really quick overview to Contracts Finder on the session today. So I'll click through when you go into Contracts Finder. Also, just to say, I'm going to give a quick overview today, but there is a video tutorial that's included in the slide deck that will come out after the session, which has an overview of how to search and set alerts up in both Contracts Finder and Finder Tender Service. But just to show you actually how simple Contracts Finder is to use, I'm going to do a demonstration just now. So this is what you'll see when you first log on to Contracts Finder. If I just click on how can I do an advanced search, and I'll just go through the different ways of searching. So if you want to use an OR search, so in effect, if you want the search to pick up any of the words that you write in this box here, then it will do so if you don't have any connectors to the words. So if you wrote something like procurement consultancy, as like it is on the screen, then it will pick up, excuse me, anything with procurement or consultancy in the title of the procurement. If you really wanted both words included, you would have procurement plus consultancy, and it would pick up then procurement and consultancy in the title. But if you wanted that to be a specific phrase, you would enclose it in speech marks. So if you wanted it to be a phrase procurement consultancy one after the other, not procurement and consultancy or procurement or consultancy, then the way you write it in the search box will determine how the search logic actually looks for it. For the purposes of today, we'll pick something like scaffolding. So if you type in the words that you wish to search on, the next thing that you really need to think about is what location are you wanting to search in. So you can search everywhere, and that will search the whole of the database. You can do a postcode search, so you can put your postcode in and a radius around that postcode that you would be willing to look at opportunities within that radius. It's the tightest search is a postcode search, or you can search at region level and pick which regions you would want to search in, including the 4 countries in the United Kingdom, Isle of Man, Channel Islands, overseas territories, Europe and rest of world as well. But for the purposes of today, I'll pick Yorkshire and the Humber as a region. And then typically Contracts Finder will have the first 3 of these boxes all pre-ticked. Generally, what will come up most on a Contracts Finder search is live opportunities. There's generally just numerically and volume-wise more of them. But if you are wanting to see things that are further in advance that are coming, it's a good idea to leave early engagement and future opportunity both ticked. And then click search. So this brings up for us 4 contracts in our selected search area. And you will see that there is a scaffolding contractors framework that's live for Bradford, which is handy given we've got Ian with us. And that's of a contract value of £500,000, closing on the 20th of October, and it was published on the 13th of September. You'll see also that there's North Tyneside Council, and you might think, well, that's not typically Yorkshire, but it comes up in the opportunity based on where the contracting authority, whether that's NHS local authority, has advertised the opportunity. So that's come up because it's an England-wide opportunity. There's Kirklees Council and Places for People group, again, which is an any region opportunity. So you can now click into that opportunity or any of the ones that you want to look at. The details will be there, and you can go to then the Contracting Authority's portal and get the documents that are relevant to that bid. If we stay in Contracts Finder for a moment, you'll see that there is a notice status. So these are open opportunities, and an open opportunity is different from a closed opportunity. Ian is just going to give us a quick overview on what an open one is versus a closed opportunity.
Thanks, Jill. So an open process is essentially anything that is advertised publicly at some stage of the process, normally right at the very beginning, that is available for any supplier to register their interest and bid for. Generally, open processes is driven by the value of the contract. So the scaffolding framework that you've seen on your screen from Bradford Council there is £500,000, and actually what we're looking for is multiple scaffolders to be part of that contract. How we drive our open advertisement for this is based upon the contract value. So there are different contract thresholds for goods, works, services and special types of services, which are often called light touch services or social and other specific services. Essentially any contract valued over the different thresholds have to be openly advertised on the Finder Tender service, which many people might previously known as OJU. Below that, there is an opportunity for all open advertisements to be published on Contracts Finder. Now, with the below threshold opportunities, many contracting authorities have the right to perhaps use a closed process, and that closed process will be where specific suppliers are invited to bid, and each individual contract authorities will determine that by their own constitution, by their own contract procedure rules or contract standing orders. So for example, in Bradford, under the Finder Tender threshold, we allow ourselves the opportunity to invite 4 organisations to bid and not publicly advertise that, and that's what we would call a closed process. Now, there's a number of reasons why we do that. Some of them are because of our kind of local political aims to actually encourage suppliers within our place, so Bradford District or the Leeds City region, to bid for the work. So actually we're encouraging them to have a 1 in 4 chance as opposed to a 1 in X chance. But every different contract authority will be different. What we do at the end of all those processes is we publish the contract award notice on Contracts Finder, so we're fully transparent in terms of how we are awarding contracts. And then the other way that you could interpret a closed process would be that if we were running a call-off procurement from an already established framework agreement. So essentially a framework agreement will be advertised openly, suppliers will be appointed onto that, and then we would run further competitions from those closed lists almost, if you want, from that framework agreement. But again, still at the end of that process, we will be publishing on Contracts Finder the results of those procurement processes.
And if anybody wanted to see the results of those procurement processes, they could tick the awarded contract box there, and that would be what showed them it on Contracts Finder, wouldn't it, Ian? Yeah, perfect. So you will see also on Contracts Finder there is something called Notice Suitability. So when I click into there, you can choose to see opportunities that are only suitable or have been designated as suitable for small to medium enterprises or the voluntary sector, voluntary community and social enterprises. If you change anything whilst you're in a search, all you need to do is update your results. And the good news is on this particular search example, all 4 contracts have been deemed by the contracting authorities as suitable for both SMEs and VCSEs. You can also change the value of contract that you want to see. So you could put in a maximum value of 150,000 and then run the search again, and that reduces the 4 opportunities down to 2. You can take that value back out, and you can then also decide if you want to look at a particular industry. Now, for a search like we're using today on scaffolding, actually you might not need to do that. But if you were searching for something like consultancy, that can be in any specific industry, you might then want to browse what's called a Cpv code. It stands for Common Procurement Vocabulary, but in essence, what it looks at is the sector that the opportunity is in. You can type that sector that you're looking for. So if I type in procurement consultancy, for example, it will take us straight to the Cpv code. I can select that and I can add that to the filter, update my results, and it would only show opportunities in consultancy that's specifically procurement consultancy services. So you can use these to help you hone down on a search. And you can also use a date range of when you want to see an opportunity that was published and when it's likely to close. So in real time, in a couple of minutes, you can search through Contracts Finder to see what opportunities are out there, both upcoming contract award notices and live opportunities. You can set up an alert function for Contracts Finder. It does, if I'm honest, come with a couple of health warnings in that the alert function is good, but like any system, it certainly isn't perfect. And my advice to any small business would be to use the alert service, but don't rely solely on it. You can see how quick it is to search Contracts Finder. Spend 5-10 minutes a week or every couple of weeks, or a regularity that suits you, and do have a trawl through Contracts Finder to see what's there. I think that's especially important when we think about dynamic purchasing systems. So a DPS, a dynamic purchasing system, is essentially a procurement competition that is always open. And contracting authorities in the public sector are using it when they want to keep continuing entry to that product. It's at least one of the reasons why the public sector would use it. But it's advertised when it's launched, but it may not be re-advertised as the rounds open and close for suppliers to enter. And so it's worth just remembering that if you're looking for a DPS type opportunity or would like to see one, you might be better using that on the search function than relying on the alert service for it. We're going to talk a little bit now about engagement. So on an event that we ran recently, we talked about something called Meet the Buyer. So there are lots of different ways for organisations to both find opportunities, but also to understand them through building relationships and getting to know your customer or potential customer. And there is a process called Meet the Buyer. We, at a recent event, ran a poll. There were hundreds of organisations that took part in it. And 85% of people that we talked to on that particular session said that they'd never attended a Meet the Buyer event. So Ian's just going to tell us a little bit about the Meet the Buyer events that Bradford has typically run, how many businesses might attend, what the purpose of those Meet the Buyer events are, and if COVID has changed that as an engagement method at all, or how it might change in the future.
Thanks, Jill. So I think when I think traditionally about Meet the Buyer events, opportunities for suppliers and generally procurement staff to network, it's normally at a large conference centre or a race course or something like that, and there's a significant cost to local authorities to putting those events on. And really, when I think about the main messages that we were giving out at those types of events, it was very much come for a chat and register on the e-procurement system, and there wasn't a great deal of depth other than that we used to give out at those types of events. And I think over the past, maybe the build up in the 18 months before the pandemic, I think that type of approach changed and evolved, and engagement became very much more project or market specific. So suppliers of a particular large project or a large service that the council or the contracting authority was about to procure were targeted, and this was normally prior to a procurement process. And I think what COVID and the pandemic has shown is that we can now do that type of process remotely, and actually we can engage with our potential suppliers on the back of an advert on Contracts Finder or our own portal, and actually bring everybody together and communicate like a webinar just like this. And actually that's made it much more efficient for us, for the suppliers as well. You'd have to take time out of your day to travel somewhere to talk to someone. And I think personally, my view is that events like this, you lose the good bits of the traditional type of meet the buyer. And where I think this will evolve in future, particularly for Bradford, is some sort of hybrid. I think we will continue to engage on project specific stuff through virtual Teams seminars. But I think what we'll end up doing is probably overlaying a lot of our pipeline work, what's coming up, with partners probably based within the district. So if you think about any given district, you've normally got some sort of NHS, hospital, colleges, universities, councils, who are all driven by the same rules and essentially all governed by what will be the change of rules as well, coming up in terms of the change of procurement legislation. And I think those are the things that we're going to see, place-based meet the buyer events where you can come and meet the key stakeholders, not just the procurement staff from all the what you would call the anchor institutes within a particular district. And I think for me, that's certainly the ambition in Bradford, and I've seen some stuff fairly recently at other places. I think Middlesbrough held one fairly recently, and that's going to be where sort of meet the buyer events go, in my opinion.
Perfect, thank you. I think in terms of engagement, it can often be difficult for small businesses because there are so many different ways. And ultimately, engagement and securing work are two parts of a whole equation. And ultimately, we will end up in almost guaranteed that the opportunity and the securing of that will come through a portal. And again, in a poll that we did recently, 60% of organisations that we talked to weren't registered on a procurement portal. And it's really hard, and I'll be brutally honest, it's really hard to say to a small business, register on all of them, because there are so many. On a previous slide, we just showed actually a few of the main ones, but there are lots of them. And it's one of the reasons why Contracts Finder could be helpful, because you'll be able to see across all of those portals in Contracts Finder and find a tender service. But ultimately, those portals are currently the mechanism of being able to access the public sector in the main. Certainly, there will be some processes that sit out of it. And so, like it or not, actually the portal is a route that small businesses will need to go through. But again, you don't need to be registered on every single portal to be able to access the opportunities that you want. But it's worth investing some time in learning. And these are questions that you can ask at things like Meet the Buyer. And you will get tabled at Meet the Buyer in a really positive way, what the portal is, how to use it, and how you can get some more help and support. Each of the portals do have help functions in there. There's tutorial videos. There is actually lots of support in any of the portals. They're there to try and help you get through it. But one of the things that I'm just going to flip to voice technology actually, and what might come up in the future, and it really is on the mind of both Go for Growth and the public sector organisations that we're working with, is actually what are the things that we can do to make accessing the public sector that bit easier. So both from a finding an opportunity perspective and understanding it, and then actually going forth and being able to submit, whether it's a grant application or a tender or a quote or whatever that is. And I think one of the acknowledgements is that small businesses are typically just super busy. Time is a really precious commodity in smaller organisations, and it is for all of us. You know, Ian works for a big organisation, and time is not in abundance for any of us. But I think in smaller organisations, likely you are multifaceted. So you are the salesperson, the procurement person, your HR, your finance, your IT. You can be a lot of different things. And so one of the things that I think we're seeing a bit more of is technology trying to make the process of interacting with public sector procurement that bit more interactive and that bit easier. And so one of the things we were exploring with a set of organisations was actually using voice-powered search functionality. How helpful would that be? And in effect, it almost gives you an ability to multitask for a time. But so if we're getting more and more used to using Alexa and Google and other search engines using the voice technology, would you be saying, right, hi Alexa, tell me what scaffolding opportunities there are in Bradford or Yorkshire and the Humber up to a value of 500,000? And that would be spoken back to you. So you were listening to that opportunity as opposed to seeing it on your technology. And then actually you might ask the voice technology to read that opportunity out to you, and maybe the technology would go as far as to actually be a more interactive bid environment where the technology actually goes through the questions. So tell me about how you manage health and safety on site as a scaffolding organisation. You have 2 minutes to talk us through it. What's your level of public liability insurance, etc., so that you speak the bid as opposed to the traditional method of going through a portal, downloading the documents, typing, and then re-uploading the documents. Now, all of that would need to be done so that the sanctity of the process is protected still, that the infrastructure, governance and compliance is there, and that the process itself doesn't create any conflict from a transparency, a visibility and a fairness perspective. But I think there are potentially some advancements in technology that will come along that will lighten the burden for, especially for smaller organisations and VCSEs, when actually interacting with that bid. And there is a long-term ask from us to anybody who is interacting with this webinar at any point. If you have ideas about things that would make that process easier or more accessible, whether that's from a technology perspective or not, please do feel free to let us know. And I think social media, social media is one of those functionalities that we are all super familiar with, both for the good and the bad of social media. But again, it's interesting to think about how social media plays its role in procurement, and potentially at the moment, not a huge amount, but 64% of people that we talked to recently said they would welcome more interaction on a social media basis from public sector buyers in terms of advertising opportunities. And so I'm just going to invite Ian to talk us through a little bit more about the engagement methods that Bradford uses and colleagues that he might know about in other authorities around social media, whether there are plans to advertise opportunities on social media in the future, how you engage now and get to know the market, and how you currently advertise your opportunities in Bradford.
Thanks, Jill. So in terms of advertising current opportunities, we are fairly traditional still. It's our own e-procurement portal, contracts finder, find a tender. What we do have in Bradford is good communication channels from the commissioners in various sectors into something like a care sector and actually the VCSE sector. And actually we have a lot to tell them on a regular basis, and we weave the procurement messages, the opportunities into those almost email distribution lists or bulletins. Where we want to improve this is we do want to use social media, and I'm really interested in what is the right platform, or is it all the platforms to advertise what our opportunities are? So is it Facebook, is it Twitter, is it LinkedIn? My personal view is that LinkedIn would be the starting point, because I think local authorities particular use Facebook, for example, for community messages and messages to citizens and residents. So that's where we want to develop our opportunities, and a really smooth process for us to advertise, but then for suppliers to see the opportunity and then be directed to the right place. Because I think what we can't get away from is, I'm not sure you'll ever be able to bid for a contract on LinkedIn. So actually it becomes another method of comments against a particular post for us to monitor. So what we're actually looking for is the most efficient way to spread the message without actually creating a burden either for ourselves from a resource perspective, or actually the suppliers respond to a comment and actually just almost get left without knowing the right information, because that's a risk for us. In terms of more broader accessibility, the one thing that we're always trying to do is improve our documents. I think one of the things that gets fed back to me a lot is that the word document, which is what it is at the minute and what it will be for most organisations, is really hard to understand, is very, very big, takes too long, is not accessible on things like iPads. The Microsoft sort of functionality kind of predetermines that everybody has a laptop. That's not necessarily the case now, so we need to think about online evaluation. Can it be done through a browser? And those are the challenges for us as we kind of move forward, thinking about accessibility. I think in terms of broader engagement, we're really pleased to be working with Go for Growth and events like these and creating that sort of enduring content that suppliers can dip in as and when suits them. And it's really important that we are part of this.
I couldn't agree more. I guess there is a driver to emulate in the public procurement space how our lives use technology and access other information and data sources going forward. So it was interesting actually, LinkedIn and Facebook are almost equal when businesses talk to Go for Growth about the platform that they would like to see used for business communications or procurement communications. 79% LinkedIn, 74% Facebook, and 53% Twitter. So typically Facebook doesn't necessarily always come up as the first place you would think about for business communications, but perhaps it is a growth area. It was certainly something we'll be exploring more on the next session with Kevin Tracy from North Yorkshire is social media. Thank you for that, Ian. So we've a little bit of information to give out actually in terms of what's coming. So at the top of the session, we talked about public good and social value. There is, of course, we all know that we have left the European Union. There is a new set of regulations for public procurement that will, we understand, will be a white paper by the end of this year and should be assented to law spring-ish time in 2022. And social value is an area that the Public Services Act says in law that social value must be considered when any public procurement is being run. So it is the duty of the public procurer to consider what social outcomes can be delivered for every pound of public money that's being spent. But actually in the new regulatory environment, that does increase its traction and that does become really much more integrated into the procurement space. And so what you'll see is whilst cost, price, all of those traditional things will remain important, you will see a shift that will be more about being value driven, and some of that will be about the social and economic value as well as the financial value. And some of the areas that will be much more prevalent in the regulatory environment going forward will be around creating new businesses, new jobs and new skills. And so that really ties into that local economic development space. Thinking about climate change, reducing waste and improving supplier diversity, innovation and resilience. So all the things that we've talked about already today are becoming much more baked into the regulatory environment. And so as a small business who aspires to either grow or start out in the public sector, those things are really positive because there is a real driver for public procurement not to be so price focused. As a procurement professional, procurement professionals are not going to apologise for taking it seriously around the cost of goods and services. However, there is a balancing act to be had between value and value. Price, cost and value are different things. And so there should be a shift in moving more towards value-driven procurement. And lots of public sector organisations are already on that journey, not waiting for the regulatory environment to change. But it's worth noting as a small business that you should see a tangible shift over time of those things shifting. And of course, climate change, carbon reduction, net zero are really important agenda. Already, anything over 5 million in terms of tender, if you are bidding for it, you will be required to have a net zero strategy. But of course, any organisation, regardless of size, will be thinking about or should be thinking or will be asked to think about their road to net zero. So there's lots of support out there at the minute and lots of information. And one of the things we in Go for Growth talk to the public sector about is the unification of these messages. So whilst the headline of net zero carbon might be the same, the manifestation of that at a place-based or a contracting authority level might be different. And so we're encouraging lots of unity if we can, which I think leads on to planned procurements. We have a national policy statement that has just been issued in June this year. What that says is that public sector organisations should publish at least 18 months in advance, preferably or ideally 5 years out. Now, having worked in public sector procurement, that's no small ask actually, looking 5 years out, but looking at planned procurements at least 18 months out should be really helpful for business organisations who are looking to see what opportunity there is. And again, I think the same as with net zero carbon and the pipelines, it would be interesting to explore with Ian whether Bradford or organisations might come together to publish those things in one place, or will work together to pull a net zero carbon strategy approach together so that smaller organisations aren't having to do small variations of the same thing time and time and time again.
So in terms of the pipeline, or what we at Bradford would call our forward procurement plan, I'm kind of really supportive of the idea, but I think for it to be effective, there's a lot of challenges that need to be overcome, both from a local authority perspective and nationally as well, and that ties into some things that you said there about working together. So from my perspective, when I think about trying to draw together this forward procurement plan, it kind of splits into two types of contracts. So there's the contracts that are in a circular sort of environment that we will always buy, and they will be renewed through a new procurement every 3 or 4 years. And I think every contracting authority will have that contracts register, and it will just be a case of transposing that and mapping that for the next 5 years, because they will always come up. I think the more complex driven stuff, which is like regeneration or building roads or things that rely on external funding, I think there's more of a challenge there. And actually the challenge is to be more organised is the very simple sort of basis of what we need to be, to draw those into the forward procurement plan, as we would call it, and then get that published. I think from a perspective of a supplier, what we need as either smaller groups or nationally is a database that's indexed, so it's not X amount of spreadsheets from every contracting authority with their list of procurements that becomes really almost quite hideous to search, and actually it just becomes an administrative function. So what I hope that the white paper and the new regs introduces is an indexed system that we can all feed consistent information in there that actually becomes really useful for suppliers. What we're looking at in terms of Bradford is working either within the place base again with our district partners, and possibly extending that to West Yorkshire, and I'm sure there's a conversation to be had with the other local authorities in the Yorkshire and Humber about how is the most efficient way to display this information to the suppliers that we want to work with.
Brilliant. Thank you. And that, I think, plays into market assessment also. So the national policy statement is calling for procurement teams to assess the market health, and really to drive that supplier diversity, innovation and resilience piece also, which is a real positive for small to medium enterprises and voluntary sector organisations. And so final slide before we move on a little bit is really just from you, Ian, about some advice that you have to give for businesses around creating those opportunities for themselves and getting on the front foot with that engagement.
I just wanted to talk about, creating opportunities and how to build relationships. And really, it's from my perspective of the amount of suppliers that contact me asking for or introducing their company or asking if we buy something or can they speak to the right person. And I tried to kind of break it down into some key questions. So starting point for me is, do we actually buy what your particular organisation may be selling? There's a lot of information already in the public domain on our contracts registers of what the local authority actually buys. Have you done your research into that? So actually, it's not a waste of your time, and as well as a waste of anybody that picks up the emails time. And on the back of that, if we do buy what you're selling, then who makes that decision? I think traditionally within local authorities, the procurement staff don't make the what decision. They don't make the what are we buying decision. That is generally done in the various services by the commissioners, if you want. And I think it's really important for anybody introducing themselves to a local authority or to a contracting authority is to try and understand who makes that decision and who is the decision maker within the contracting authority. So if you send an email to, say, me or someone in my team, don't be kind of put off if you're passed on, because you kind of passed on to the people that make that decision within the service. Similarly to that is, do you know where the contracting authority is within its contracting cycle? So if we've just awarded a contract for 5-6 years for a thing that you sell, then actually it's unlikely that we're going to be able to, or we're going to be buying that again in the near future. And again, this is using the information that's already out there in the public domain to try and time that approach. So in timing that approach, we're talking maybe 12 to 18 months before the contract starts. Officers within contracting authorities will start to be thinking about recommissioning and reprocuring the service. So actually, armed with all that information, which is all readily available through the procurement sections of most contracting authorities' websites, it's really about kind of when you approach it, it's that intelligent approach that you already know. And actually, where you can offer evidence or tell us about a new mutually beneficial, that's kind of the hook. And that's what interests me. So, from a personal perspective, you would not believe the amount of messages I get on LinkedIn. It would be a full-time job to reply to them all. People asking about, can they have a meeting? Can they tell me this? All that sort of stuff. And actually, I do try and scan them all, but like I said, it would be impossible to reply. So when you reflect on the websites where all the information is, there will be a contact email. Drop that line with links, not attachments. Make it really easy to understand who you are and what you're offering. And I believe 9 times out of 10 you will get redirected to the right person who will then be able to assist you and tell you about any opportunities that we have coming up, or alternatively where we are in a contracting cycle, so that you can make a note and come back at the right time.
Thank you, Ian. That's great advice. And that sort of concludes the information that we're going to give today around finding opportunities, engagement methods. Our next event for Go for Growth is next Monday. It's the 4th of October, where we're talking about promoting your organisation. So we'll be thinking a little bit further on in the process in terms of how do you as a small business actually stand out from the crowd. It can feel like it's a crowded market sometimes. We're going to explore more and feed from what Ian has just talked about in terms of that commissioning and procurement, and really explore who does what and how the process comes together in the public sector. And I'm delighted to be joined by Kevin Drazy, the Head of Procurement for North Yorkshire County Council, on there. Those are the booking details if you want to register. And if you want to get in touch with either Ian or myself, our contact details are on screen. We do have a couple of minutes left for questions, and there is one that came in prior to the event that I know lots of organisations talk to us about, that I'd probably like to throw at you, Ian, if that's okay. So lots of businesses talk to us around when they're looking to secure opportunities, and it's about the process itself in terms of the information that they have to enter. If they're bidding 2, 3, 4 different opportunities, they're continually filling out the same sort of information about their organisation. Do you foresee a time where people will either qualify once for the public sector or a geography regionally? And will there be, do you think, a time where actually the information that you put in about your business, your size, your insurances can automatically carry through, so you're not repeating yourself at the front end?
Absolutely. I think that has got to be the goal. I think that's got to be the goal of all contracting authorities, central and local government. We need to move to this mindset of tell us once, because I think you're absolutely right. There's so much duplication when you're procuring across different contracting authorities. And if we can get to a point where there's a central database that's easily accessible, that's trusted, that's up to date, and that mitigates any risks, because to be perfectly honest, asking people to fill in your own forms is a comfort blanket for contracting authorities, and that's what we kind of probably need to remove and have this central database where we trust that we can access it, and then actually that would really streamline the qualification process. And I think there's some green shoots there in some of the stuff that have come out in various PPNs and the green paper as well. And hopefully that's something that can come to fruition.
And a PPN, Ian, we just explain what a PPN is for us, just in case people aren't aware.
So PPN is a public procurement notice, and that's sort of guidelines, guidance that gets issued to all public sector contracting authorities on the Cabinet Office website. So it would be really interesting. You know, you've mentioned the policy statement that was issued in June. People might like to go on there and revisit some of the guidelines that are given to us as procurers, and you can hold us to account to those, because those are the things that we should be following.
Brilliant, that's great. Thank you so much. I don't think there are any other questions actually, so I think that concludes the session for now. So thank you, Ian, so much for giving up your time to join us. Thank you everybody that's joined us on the session today. The recording will come out to you over the next week or so, and if there's any questions in the meantime or anything that we can do, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you everyone, and have a great day.